little bit more about liquidity. So but before we go into that, that's all I'm going to cover for inventory accounting for this course. Any questions for inventory accounting for today's lecture? We're still going to talk a bit more about inventory in our next lecture, but I want to talk about ratios for the rest of the day, and some appendix pieces. Next time, we're going to go into more detail on the complexities of inventory accounting. So I know it's a lot. Just know we're going to be covering this in 2 lectures because it's such a detailed area of this course. I'd say out of this course, this is one of the tougher areas, right? We're starting to get into the details of accounting. So if it seems like a lot to you, just spend extra time on this section. You're going to need to know all of this information for your next lecture, my next lecture too. It's going to be a building block, just like all of them have been. So make sure you're doing all your homework and staying on top, or it's going to be easy to fall behind. So any questions related to inventory before I go into this ratio analysis? Think that is a no? Okay. So the acid test ratio. So we might want to know, how likely is a company able to pay for its short-term debts? Its immediate debts. We use the ratio called the acid test ratio, which is known as the quick assets divided by current liabilities. So I'll go back to the Google Sheets. Acid test ratio here. Quick assets, current liabilities is going to equal our acid test. So if our quick assets are $100 and our current liabilities are $100, our acid test ratio is 1, which means that we have just enough money to pay off all of our current liabilities. So your question here should be, what is quick assets? Quick assets is going to be your cash plus your short-term investments plus your receivables. So this is everything you can convert to cash relatively quickly.
So would inventory not be a short-term investment?
Sorry, let me share this. What was that?
Would inventory not be a short-term investment?
It wouldn't. We don't expect, we wouldn't include inventory in our acid test ratio. Short-term investment would be if I owned equity in another company. Like if a company purchased another company's stock.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. And so our so good question. And so let's just make sure that for quick assets, I might mess with you in a question, or the book might mess with you. They might add inventory of 100. So that was a good point. You wouldn't include it in your acid test ratio. It'd be excluded. Only thing in your quick assets are your cash plus your short-term investments plus your receivables. And so you can see here, if I change this amount, it'll give us a different acid test. If your acid test is under 1, you're in trouble. Right? It means that you're probably not going to be able to pay your debts. The higher the number is, the better.
And the reason that receivables are there is because that's short-term, whereas notes are long-term?
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
Good job, Jeremy.
Professor, I have a question about the receivables.
Yep.
So kind of going back to like discount purchases and whatever. So can the company somehow change the terms of payment, or like how are they going to force receiving the receivables?
I mean, it's a legal contract. That's an excellent point. You can't really enforce it, right? I mean, there's other ways. Depending on the assets, there's ways that you can, but that's why we have bankruptcy law in America, right? Like if a customer can't pay their receivables, then they might have to go bankrupt. And so that would be a good, let me tell you kind of how companies would mitigate this risk. Is generally before you extend credit to a customer, you do a credit check. Just like we have credit ratings, so do all businesses. And you can actually look up, if it's a public company, you could see their bond credit rating. Like an AAA means, hey, these guys have cash. This company has cash and they're going to be able to pay you back. A B or under means, hey, you're going to have to pay a lot more interest because we don't know if you're going to pay us back. We might not give you favor, or we might not even extend you credit. other things we could do is if it's inventory, we can have us say, hey, if you go bankrupt, we're going to take all our inventory back, right? Or we can perfect their assets. We can ask them to collateralize the loan. There's a lot we can do to mitigate risk in this area, but you're correct that it's actually a business strategy to pay back slowly, right? So if depending on whose corner I'm in, if I'm helping you sell product, I will tell you, hey, you should try to collect up front as quickly as possible your cash, because you never know if a customer is going to bail on you. And so I like the idea of either collecting money up front or offering a small discount for cash up to collect cash up front, so you mitigate the risk of collection. But if I'm representing the other side, if I'm making you purchase something in the long term, I'm going to say try to pay it off as long as possible, right? You don't want to pay money because you can use that money to invest it. As long as you can get the same deal, you don't want to pay that money. It's okay if you don't pay a penalty, pay late. That's a business strategy to pay vendors late. It's not ethical. I don't like it, but you can try to legally try to extend your terms, right? So I'd say if I'm trying to sell to a customer, I'd say, hey, you have to prepay me. But if I'm trying to pay someone, I'll say, hey, I'm going to pay you every 120 days, right? There's a collection strategy there. It's ethical as long as you're following the contract. If you violate the contract, then I'm not in favor of violating contracts, but people do it as well. Let's see, there's a chat question. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I think so. I think you answered it. I'm just like my brain's taking another 5 minutes to process it.
You can repeat it. You can ask it again. Okay. Or what was the question again?
Basically, so if I'm a company and I'm gonna do my asset test ratio thingy, or for some reason I need to get my receivables into cash. How am I going to force people to pay me cash?
Well, yeah, there'd be a legal. It's a contract, so I'd issue let's say I'm the company and I sell it to you and I issue an invoice saying 30 days, you have to pay me. There's a contract behind that saying if you don't pay me in 30 days, I could either get my inventory back, I could penalize you, but in practice it would be difficult, right? I would have to then go through the court system, or I might have to go through debt collectors to collect my cash if you didn't want to pay me. So there's always going to be a risk.
So essentially all I can do is like wait for them to pay based on the contract. I can't speed it up anyway.
If you put discounts, you can request it. But yeah, it's part of trust. Yeah, it's difficult. Most businesses want to keep a good relationship with their vendors, because then if someone doesn't pay all the time, then you get a reputation. People stop wanting to work with you. And not to get political here at all. I'm not trying to choose sides or anything ever in politics, especially as a professor. But Trump's famous in the news for kind of doing that to his vendors, right? That he won't pay them, and I think that's a business strategy. There's not just him. There's a lot of businesses that do that. But then you can see, I think he's having trouble finding attorneys now because of delinquent payments, right? So if you too aggressively do a certain strategy, then people get wise and stop working for you.
Okay, thank you. That does help a lot.
Okay, no problem. Let me see, there's a few more questions. So acid test, so let's see. Yeah, it's not a bad thing to have too many quick assets, Saeed. This is a good question. There's financial theories too complex. It depends, right? Not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I'd say it's really nice to have a lot of cash. I would rather have a lot of cash than no cash, but you could probably invest that cash to get a higher return. And that's a different theory. That's financial theory, and we can go into that sometime. But there's tons of arguments on, is it better to have less debt, more debt? Is it better to have less cash, more cash? Is it better to invest a certain amount? There's no right answer, but there's financial theory around it, which you'll discuss and you'll learn more about as you go through your courses. But it's kind of beyond the scope of this to judge on what the ratios are. Yep. And the quick ratio is a different, Alyssa. It's a good question. Acid test ratio is more strict than the quick ratio. Quick ratio would include inventory and all current assets. Quick ratio and current ratio kind of synonymous.
Um, what is the difference between quick assets and the current assets?
Yeah, so current assets are all assets that you can sell within a year that are considered to be liquid, can be converted to cash within a year. So that generally includes inventory.
Okay.
Yeah, while the quick assets exclude inventory. Quick
Okay.
assets are only cash, short-term investments, and receivables. That's it. It's a very strict definition. I know it's just stuff to memorize. And so here's the example of JCPenney saying, like, you could see JCPenney before, I believe they're bankrupt now, got in trouble because their asset test ratio just kept dropping. Or hey, they just, as of 2011, they couldn't pay their debts anymore without their inventory. And by 2015, they were in quite a bit of trouble. Even though they had a lot of inventory, so they could sell their current ratio, it was clear by their asset test ratio that if they weren't able to sell the inventory, they would go bankrupt, and that's what happened. And so you could have a positive current ratio and still go bankrupt because you weren't able to sell your inventory. Okay. The other piece to do here is the gross margin ratio. So the gross margin ratio is just our net sales minus our cost of goods sold over net sales. Another way to look at that is just our gross profit minus net sale. Divided by net sales. So that just tells us how much profit we make for every item we sell. Let's see this is JCPenney again. You can see their gross profit kind of starts to drop. It used to be 39%. It starts to drop, goes back up in 2015. You can see that they're making less profit based on every sale. And so we can investigate a company either linearly, like how it happened, how they're doing over time, if their profit is increasing or decreasing, or we can compare it to its competitors. Hey, does Target have a better gross profit than JCPenney? And see what might be a better investment. It just means that they're able to sell it for a higher cost or manage their costs directly attributable to the products better. You need to memorize these ratios, so please memorize them.